it or something, or you can just, you know, get up and walk away. And I apologize for that. Hey, here we are. But if you're here to find out about airline pricing, then I'll be happy to tell you what I know about it. So this is me. I am Barry Bird. I teach at Drew University, and I'm reachable at barry@bird.org. And by the way, I don't normally just kind of, you know, say, oh, here's my slide set. But if you're interested in a copy of my slides, then you can send me email at barry@bird.org and remind me where you saw this presentation, and I'll be happy to send them to you. So let's talk about airline pricing. I mean, oh man.
Barry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. As you move away from the desk, the audio quality is greatly diminished and becomes garbled.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna try not to wander. Tell me how far I can wander away from. So if I'm here, you can hear me, right?
Yes, very well, in fact.
Okay, now I'm gonna move away for just a sec. And you tell me if at that distance I'm still all right. Okay?
Yes, go right ahead.
How am I doing?
It's half the intelligibility as before. So
okay, so I really have to stay still. What I'm going to ask then, I have trouble sitting still during a presentation, but I have to stand still during this presentation. So what I'm going to ask is everybody in the room, if during the presentation you wouldn't mind moving back and forth, and that way I'll have that same sense of motion. All right, when I have to make an airline reservation, I quake in my boots. Am I unusual that way? I just feel like I'm going to hit the reserve button, and it's just, you know, first of all these things are non-refundable. Oh yeah, refundable, right? If you're willing to pay 3 times the amount, right? And what if you want to change your mind later? No problem, $150 fee, and you have to use it within the next 3 months. And and how do I get the best price? Airline pricing works that they change the prices 10 times a day. They're gaming me, right? They're gaming all of us. So the idea is based on the demand, they're trying to get the most amount of money that they can and fill the most seats that they can. And they're trying to balance that. So they look at what the demand is, and based on that, they'll adjust it this amount and adjust it this amount and that amount. This just scares me. I'm going to make some mistake, right? I'm going to reserve too soon, or I'm going to wait. And I talked to somebody at a gathering on Sunday last week, and he said the best thing to do is to wait till the last minute to make your reservation. And I said, no, that's not. The prices go up before that. He said, no, they go down, but I don't know what, right? And I'm the kind of person who feels guilty if I get really badly ripped off, if I don't play this game correctly. Now, I want to begin by asking, am I unusual, or can you all kind of empathize with this? I feel terrible when I have to make a decision. Am I the only one here, or what?
No, because like you said, you're always like, am I doing this too soon? Am I doing it too late? Right. Yeah.
Okay, so for those of you out in Zoom land, I just got confirmation that someone else feels the same way that I do. Diane Selvin, how do you feel? Yeah, I mean, or Selvin, have you made a plane? Have you done a lot? What do you feel?
It's like the same thing. It's the right way. It's like the best thing to do.
Right.
It's like also I always think it counts like the time you can do it yours on the flight, like a month before.
Yeah, or should you do it a month before? Should do it 54 days. I heard once was the the magic, the sweet spot. And so I reserved 54 days in advance. But then I found out on another website that only applies for when you're reserving for a flight in the fall. If you're reserving for a flight in January, it's not 54 days ahead of time, it's 36 days. Go figure, right? And I just feel I shouldn't take this so personally, but I do. And so then what I do is I say to myself, I'm going to visit a website that says we find the best prices for you. And I heard a laugh, a sarcastic laugh. And that's the right thing to do, because the moral to this presentation is that websites can't find the best price for you. It's not possible. Now, there's a new deal with Expedia that I heard where if the price goes down, then they'll refund you the amount of money between the time you buy it and the time that you fly. I tried that formally. No?
Seems like an impossible business model. I would never agree to that.
I tried that. I tried that with another provider. I don't remember who, Booking or something like that. And I tried it a couple times and I never got a cent back. The prices never seemed to go down as far as they were concerned, right? So what's the deal here? Again, the message of this presentation is that it's not possible for them to find the lowest price fare for you. And the corollary to that is I don't feel guilty about not getting the best price anymore. Because if it's not possible for them to do it, how can I fault myself for doing it incorrectly? So the overwhelming, I mean, there's some technical details here. And when you see the technical details, you might say, oh, those are just technical details. But the overwhelming takeaway that I get from a presentation like this, from the facts that I learned when I looked into this was, Barry, you're okay. You're not doing any worse than a typical computer algorithm would do. All right. Let's take a look. And that didn't do anything. Let's see. There we go. So here's kayak.com, right? I just scooped this off the web, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago. And find the least expensive fare. So Kayak will show you what Priceline has for it and what is this called, Best or some other thing, and a whole bunch of things like Delta, and how much. Look at that, $191. Well, these are for different flights, different times.
Anybody that we use an actual kayak understands why that service is called kayak. They tilt and flip you out really easily.
For those of you in Zoom land, that it's called kayak because they flip you out. What does that mean?
No, I'm saying anybody that we use an actual kayak understands the name.
Oh.
Kayaks have a tendency to flip over and dump you into the water very rarely.
Oh, okay, all right. So you don't like using kayaks, and this is the
This is probably I think it's probably the name.
I don't know. I'm just saying. I mean, find the least expensive fare. Okay, right. Find the best, right? Yeah.
Rocks of Rock is the old joke goes.
What?
Rocks of Rock is the old joke goes.
Rocks of Rock?
Rocks of Rock. No.
All right. Okay.
None of them got it.
All right. Okay.
Don't worry about it.
No, I would ask you for more details, except I'm aware that people online can't hear. So yeah, here we go. I mean, look, there's this thing called fares in the air. How do airline companies set up their pricing? Never mind the fact that they change the prices 10 times a day. Don't worry about that for now. Let's just consider it's noon on Tuesday the 13th, and how do they determine the price to get from here to Los Angeles and back, right? Well, there's this thing called fares. And in this diagram, there were two fares. There's fare A and fare B. And the orange lines represent fare A going from Newark to LAX. And the blue lines represent fare B going from LAX back to Newark. And that's one way of calculating the price. Okay. Next slide. The exact same trip can be divided up differently between what we're now going to call fare A, which is just the part where we go from Newark to O'Hare, and part B, which is where we go from O'Hare to Los Angeles, and from Los Angeles back to Texas, and from Texas back to Newark. So the problem, a fundamental problem with airline pricing is that part of the pricing heuristic, part of the pricing scheme depends on how you divide the trip up into fares. And for a particular trip, there's more than one way to divide it into fares. Now, this whole thing with dots and arrows in the computer world, this is called a graph. So a graph is basically a diagram with dots and lines connecting the dots. And sometimes the lines are arrows, sometimes they're just straight lines. But the point is, hey, it look familiar? Yeah. But the point is that this is really well studied in the world of computing, and computer professionals have spent years studying how these graphs work and how to program graphs and how to get the most of graphs and how to solve problems with graphs. And there was a professional in 2008 who was working on graph problems concerning airline pricing and discovered the following thing. And I think it's on the next slide. The fact that fares vary, the fact that the same trip can be envisioned this way as fare A all the way to Los Angeles and fare B all the way back to Newark, or this way as fare A just going to Chicago and fare B going the rest of the way. The fact that a round trip can be envisioned in two ways with two different ways of breaking it into fares makes the problem of finding the best price what we call NP hard. Now, I'm just going to take a really quick survey here and ask, have you heard the terminology NP hard? And do you have an idea of how frightening that terminology is to computer professionals?
This piece is HP. Not sure which one's right.
NP.
This NP. Okay.
Never mind my screen. Don't believe everything you see on a screen. Yeah, he said a virtual people. Someone here observed that this says HP hard and not NP hard. I will correct that. HP hard, that must be Hewlett Packard hard. Yeah. NP hard is non-deterministic polynomial hard. It should be an N. Yeah. Have you heard of this? No? All right. What time are we going till? No. I'm not. I'm serious. I'm not.
12:15.
12:15. Okay. All right. How do I find which of the 2 points in this picture are closest to one another? How would I go about doing that? What would be my strategy? I guess at this point, I would step up, oh no, I can do this, right? You can see my pointer, right? Would I measure this distance, right? Would I measure this distance? Yeah, probably, right? Would I measure this distance from here to here? I see a no. And your name is? Andrea. Andrea says no, right? Why not?
Because you know the one in the middle has to be.
You know the one in the middle has to be closer to the other one. I mean, basically, you don't have to compare this leftmost point with this point here because it can't possibly be closer to the leftmost point than the point that's in the middle. So you wouldn't bother with that, right? So basically what you're going to have to do here is you're going to have to compare points 1 and 2 to one another. You're going to have to compare points 2 and 3 to one another, 3 and 4 to one another, and so on. And here are the comparisons that you're going to have to make. And I probably have gotten this wrong on one slide or another in this presentation, but I count 7 different measurements that you have to make. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, that's cool. And I don't have to measure any other distances. I don't have to add distances together. It's just a matter of 7 distances that I have to measure. All right. Now, how does a computer nerd evaluate the process of finding the shortest distance? Well, they don't say, oh, 7. And it takes a millisecond for each measurement, so that's 7 milliseconds. We don't do that because milliseconds, you know, my machine will do it in a millisecond, yours will do it in a nanosecond. My machine will do it in a millisecond. I'm going to get more memory. Now I can do it in a picosecond or whatever. The seconds are not the issue, right? What is the issue for a real computer is what happens when I add another dot? That's really the measurement. That's really the way that we evaluate problem solving. If I add another dot, right? I add that little point in the middle there. How does it change the amount of work that I have to do? And the answer is, in this case, that instead of measuring the distance between this point here and this point here, I'm going to have to make one more measurement. So instead of measuring 7 distances from one another, now I'm going to have to measure 8 distances from one another. Add one more point, measure one more distance. Okay, I can do that. Add one more customer, take one more nanosecond. Or if your machine can do it in a millisecond only, add one more customer, take one more millisecond. Yeah, fine. Now let's consider a slightly different problem. How do you find the 2 points that are closest here? At this stage of the game, the points aren't all on the same line. All you have, you see, is the numbers of the coordinates of each of the points. You can kind of do something clever with circles and circumferences, but let's not worry about that for now. I think, just in a brute force way, that if you look at this and figure what distances do I have to measure, basically you're going to have to compare every point with every other point distance-wise. Now, I know there are tricks you can do to get around that, but let's just do it brute force way. I think really what you have to do is compare all the distances. You have to say how far is this point here from this point, and this point from this point, and this one from over here. You have to look at all the possibilities. And so I made a drawing of all the distances there, and I meticulously counted them up and got it wrong several times. And then I think that I got it right, and it was 21 distances that I had to do. And that's because every point has to connect with every other point. And then there's some overlap. You don't have to compare points to themselves. And if you compare point A to point B, you don't have to go and compare point B to point A. So it reduces down to 21, but it's still a larger number. And now, what happens if I add one more point? Is it going to be one more distance that I have to compare? What do you think? I'm sorry, it was, again, Andrea. Andrea says no. Andrea, what do you think?
No, it's not gonna be, you're gonna have to like that.
Okay, so if I add one more point, right, then I'm going to have to compare that point with every other point on the graph. Boom, I'm going to have to add 7 more lines. Now, what that means is that these two problems are different in nature. For one of them, add a new customer, you just add a new millisecond, right? For this one, add a new customer and you have to add 8 more milliseconds. So the processing time that you need to devote to this problem is expanding much faster than the amount of processing time that you need to devote to this problem. And here, well, with this line, you just get yourself more memory, you're kind of okay. With this one, if the number of points gets too large, you can't just double the amount of memory you have. You're going to have to, it's going to get messy, right? So, I mean, there are really 2 categories of problems here. And the line problem we call an order n problem, because add 1 customer, increase by 1 millisecond. The number of milliseconds, if the number of customers is n, the number of milliseconds that you have to process is n. The problem where the things aren't in a line, it turns out that the number of steps you have to do is the square of the number, roughly the square of the number of dots you have. So here I had 8 dots and I needed 21 lines. Well, roughly 8 dots and I needed 64 lines. I mean, roughly, right? Add another dot, and instead of 64, now you need 9 times 9 is 81. And the amount of processing time that you have to worry about when you add one more thing makes this problem much more difficult for a computer to solve, for any computer to solve. You can't keep up with the amount of resources that you need when the number of dots gets to be very large. You can't just double the size of the machine. You have to just start quadrupling it. You just have to go crazy. So on this graph, there's less computing time required for these simple problems here, the line problems, and slightly more for the problems where you've got dots spread out that aren't necessarily in a line. I don't know if you know about this thing called matrix multiplication. If you were, oops, wait, oh, there we go. There's this thing called matrix multiplication that expands even quicker, n cubed. Computer scientists like problems that take n amount of time. They're okay with problems that have to take n squared time. They're a little bit disconcerted with problems that take n cubed time. But then there's n fourth, n fifth, n sixth, n seventh, and so on. Those become unmanageable. Those are just, we don't have the computing power to solve those problems. And it's not a matter of getting a slightly faster machine. It's a matter of knowing that not only how fast a machine we get will still have the machine be bursting at the seams if we add more instances, if we add more dots, if we add more airports, if we add more customers. We just simply can't keep up with those problems. Well, here's the deal. The airline pricing problem is not an n problem. Easy. It's not an n squared problem. Tolerable. It's not an n cubed problem. Barely tolerable. It's not an n to the seventh problem. Unmanageable. It's not even a ridiculous problem, n to the 100. It's beyond all of those. It's NP hard. And what NP hard means is don't even try to solve it. We can't do it. For the general problem, we just need too much in the way of resources to solve it. Now, that doesn't mean we can't come up with good approximate solutions. It's just that our solutions are always approximate. If we start having too many ways to divide up the fare and too many different possibilities, fly not from Newark to Chicago, but fly nonstop, not Newark to Chicago, but Newark to Seattle, and then Seattle to Los Angeles, not Newark to Seattle to Los Angeles, but Newark to Chicago to Denver to Los Angeles. When the number of possibilities start multiplying, the amount of processing time that we have to take becomes astronomical. And that's under the hood the reason why this problem is really difficult. It's a technical problem that in computer science in 2008, this fellow discovered was really not something that we can solve. Okay, I have more to say about this, but before I go on, I want to pause and see if what I'm saying makes sense. I see a nod. What does everybody else say? I see some nods. Okay. Andy, you don't get to nod. You just walked in 3 minutes ago.
But I still got it. So you're doing a really good job.
What?
But I still got it.
Okay,
So
all right. Diane, am I making sense? Okay. Selvin, am I making sense? You mean 1 to 5 or no? Okay, yeah. All right, here we go. It gets worse. How could it possibly get worse? Well, as I'm saying that, I'm kind of hoping that the next slide starts to address how it's getting worse, because honestly, I don't remember what the next slide says. Let me, yeah, never mind that. Never mind that, never mind that. Don't worry about that one. Forget about that one. Don't worry about that. Okay, this one is the one that I want to get to. You know, this business about being able to chop a flight into different fare segments is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to airline pricing. I'm not even gonna mention anything about the fact that they change the fares 10 times a day. Let's not even worry about it. I mean, we all know that that's craziness. But let's just think about taking a snapshot of the fares at noon on Tuesday, the 13th, something like that, right? In addition to having different amount of pricing for different ways of chopping a round trip into fares, there also is this notion of priceable units. Now, you can't just assign a price in the airline industry to any sort of path. So if I go from Newark to Los Angeles and from Los Angeles to Toronto and then from Toronto to Seattle and then from Seattle back to Los Angeles and from Los Angeles to Dallas and from Dallas to Denver and from Denver back to Seattle, that's not a priceable unit. They have no way of assigning a price to that. There are actually only 6 kinds of priceable units. This, by the way, is true when the fellow worked on it in 2008. It's probably even more complicated now. But when he worked on it, there were 6 kind of priceable units, and they looked basically like this: one way, round trip, 2 kinds of open jaw units, 2 kinds of circle units. Every flight that was taken had to be divided up somehow into these priceable units. And of course, for a particular trip that you're taking, there are different ways of dividing them into priceable units. For instance, I can, if I'm making 3 stops, I can make it be open jaw plus one way in 2 different ways. So let's say I'm going from Newark to Seattle to Los Angeles and back to Newark. Here's Newark. Here's Seattle. Here's Los Angeles, right? So it can be a round trip circle of the kind that I have near the bottom of this diagram, or it could be an open jaw followed by a one way. Ooh, it says washable. Oh, no. Does this say washable on it?
It says washable, but it doesn't say dry erase.
Oh.
If you're gonna follow it out there.
I was once at was it Stevens Institute? I think, and I was working on an expensive smartboard, right? And I accidentally picked up an indelible ink on the things under these. Yeah. Well, anyway. All right. So, I mean, open jaw followed by one way, or you can do one way followed by open jaw. And there are all kinds of ways of dividing this. Okay. When you do that, when you consider that kind of complication and the kinds of complications that you find on this slide, you get a problem that's even more difficult than NP hard. Even more difficult. These are typical restrictions on combination of fares, and I won't bother reading these to you because you can read them. The one that I found fascinating is, and I think it's still in effect, is the Adopt a Kitten program. This actually exists. For one thing, it was a way of me getting cat pictures into my slides. For another thing, it's the most bizarre pricing policy that I've ever seen in my life. But if you combine all these things, then you get the following kind of problem. And again, I hope that the next slide, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to goof around here. I just want to make sure that the next slide has, yeah. Planning with all of these considerations is not too time consuming to solve. It is demonstrably impossible to solve. No way, no how. No matter how large a computer you have, you cannot solve this problem in general. Now, when I say cannot, you're probably saying, oh, because we don't have enough resources. After all, years ago, I remember seeing a documentary where they said, we'll never be able to store a whole movie onto a storage medium digitally. It just can't be done. It's, baloney, right? 10 years later, we were able to do it. That's not the case with this. This is impossible. If aliens came from another planet and said they could solve this problem, we would have to distrust them immediately. Cue the Twilight Zone music. Is that sentence true or false? What?
Unknowable.
Unknowable? Okay. Tell me why.
Because
The sentence
it's true
contradicts.
that it's false.
If this sentence is false, then it's true. If this sentence is true, then it's false. And fortunately, I have another slide. If it's true that this sentence is false, then this is a true sentence that's false. Well, that doesn't make any sense, right? And if it's false that this sentence is false, then this true, okay, you get the idea. Oh, by the way, I told you there's something about AI in this talk, right? Last night, I asked ChatGPT, is no the correct answer to the question that I'm asking you now? And ChatGPT got this wrong. It says no is the correct answer to the question that you're asking me now. This is because you have asked if no is the correct answer to the question. And by affirming that it is, I'm responding with no. But if no is the correct answer, then you're saying no, that no is not the correct answer. It's self-contradictory. And you see, the thing that people discovered in the 1930s, right? Way back when I was only 40 years old, is that you can run into this kind of a paradox when you're trying to solve computer problems. You run into this kind of a paradox typically when you have self-reference and negation, right? So in this case, I have self-reference, a sentence that's referring to itself, and I have negation, where the way it's referring to itself is to say that itself is wrong, that itself is false. And it's the same trick over here. It's a question that refers to itself, and it's asking the question is no, is negation, is not the correct answer. So whenever you combine negation with self-reference, you're in danger of getting this paradoxical situation, the way it resolves itself in computer programming is it means that a certain problem cannot be solved. No way. It is contradictory to think that this problem can be solved. And there are lots of problems that fall into that category. Now, would you imagine? Oh, well, let's just see. What do I have time-wise?
13 minutes.
13 minutes. Would you imagine that the airline pricing problem has this feature in it? You really wouldn't, but I have another problem that has this feature in it, and you wouldn't really imagine that it does. It doesn't look as if it has self-reference and contradictions, but it turns out that it does, and it's called post-correspondence problem. So post-correspondence problem and the problem of finding the cheapest airline flight, they don't look self-contradictory, but a careful analysis tells us that they are. Let's just take a look for a minute about post-correspondence problem. Is there a way to line up some of these dominoes so that the string of characters on the top is the same as the string of characters on the bottom? Can I do it? Well, I certainly can't do it by eyeballing this. But it turns out it can be done with this set of dominoes. And I'll show you the solution. So if I use only these dominoes, and I can do some repetition, I can use A, B twice here. That's okay. And I don't have to use all of them, but I guess I did here. Then on the top, there's A, B, C, A, B, C. And on the bottom, there's A, B, C, A, B, C. So I have the same sequence of letters on the top as on the bottom. Right? Now, can that be done no matter what set of dominoes I have? Well, no. I'm not always fortunate enough to be handed dominoes that can do this. For example, I'm never going to be able to do it with that. Because no matter what combination of dominoes I use, there are always going to be more letters on top than there are on the bottom. It just can't be done. Okay, so post-correspondence problem is, hand me a bunch of dominoes and tell me if it's possible at all to line them up so that this happens. And you might say, well, if I try for 100 years and I haven't gotten anywhere, that must mean that it can't be done. Well, no. As soon as you walk away, some 14-year-old kid is going to come by and move dominoes around and get it right, and they'll be lined up, right? What's more, it's probably a 14-year-old kid that you dislike to begin with and dislike more, even more after they do it. So, I mean, post-correspondence problem says that if you hand me an arbitrary set of dominoes, it is self-contradictory to be able to tell in general all the time whether they can be lined up. There's nothing self-referential, obviously, about that problem. There's nothing negative-wise about that problem, and yet this problem, it's not n-cubed. It's not an unmanageable problem. It's not a ridiculous problem. It's not even a forget about it problem. It's an impossible, provably impossible problem. And so is airline pricing. Finding the best fare, given all the combinations of possibilities that airline restrictions place, is provably impossible to solve. Can't be done. So the next time I have to make an airline reservation for myself, I'm going to go on there with a chip in my shoulder. I'm going to say, you know what? I'm going to get this process wrong, but I'm not going to do any worse than the world's best algorithm. And that's going to make me feel good. And I am Barry Bird from Drew University. Thank you. Any questions or comments or anything? No? All right. Okay, cool. Enjoy the day.